Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast. Tonight, we're going to be talking about chambers of reflection. Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our opinions and thoughts are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions, either here on YouTube or on our Facebook page. We'd also appreciate a thumbs up and especially any comments on our videos. Good evening. I'm David Colbeth. I'm a Master Mason in Washington State. I'm joined by our co-host, Steve Chung, a Master Mason in British Columbia, and Master Mason Zane McCune, our special guest tonight. Almost a guest host. He's been on the show a few times, and so we're joined by him. He's also Master Mason in Washington State and the founder and creator of a Masonic Facebook group called the Masonic Experience. Welcome, Zane.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So tonight we're going to be talking about the chambers of reflection. Kind of a neat topic. I know Zane has some specific experience in that. Their lodge, Verity Lodge in Kent, Washington, has that feature in their initiatic experience, and there's several lodges that do. And so, you know, you kind of have a little bit of a presentation, so to speak, on the idea. So if you want to kind of jump into it, we can ask questions. And what is a chamber of reflection? I guess maybe that's a better question to start with.
Yeah, well, and it's a good question because I actually get that question quite a bit. I'm one of the instructors at the Lodge Leadership Retreat, and that's a Washington State annual event for the up-and-coming officers of lodges all around. And in our breakout sessions, that topic comes up, and there really is not a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of inquisitive Masons, and so I think there's a little bit of a gap. So I'm really glad that you guys chose this topic for one of your segments. I think it was a great idea. Well, basically what it is a room separate from, well, let me actually tell you what it isn't first. It isn't part of standard work ritual. All right. It's probably easier to start with what it isn't. It is not an innovation within ritual work. There's no ritual work that takes place during it. It doesn't happen at any time during the entered apprentice degree or anything. So I just want to get that out of the way.
Is it only during the apprentice? Is it only an apprentice degree thing?
Well, actually lodges, in our lodge, we just do it right before the entered apprentice degree. I know of lodges that will conduct theirs in between each of the 3 degrees. So I've seen both happen. Okay. For us, our interpretation of it is, and we'll get into it in just a little bit, it's more appropriately used prior to the EA degree.
Yeah.
And for us, it's a separate room off the preparation room, specifically designed for that use.
Is this done at every lodge in your jurisdiction?
No, I would say this is probably done at a small handful. My guess is probably 3, 4, or 5 lodges right now are probably do this.
Yeah, I was gonna say about less than 5%, probably.
Yeah. The question that it comes up: is it a modern innovation? Is it just some a bunch of neat symbols that Masons in the 20th century have said, hey, let's do something like this? And definitely that's not the case. A strong argument can be made that this was actually something that several hundred years ago was probably lost a little over time, no longer conducted, and then now there's a handful of lodges that are sort of rediscovering things like this. Probably one of the reasons that it is not well known is that it's lost. It's been kind of lost over the time from usage, and so
it was more commonplace to be done in years gone by.
That's my interpretation, although I can't I can't say that for absolute sure.
It
What I
does.
think we can infer is that it's not an innovation within the late 20th century.
It does seem to be that what I read too was that it was mostly the French and Scottish rites that formalized this as something for their initiatic experience, and that there was actually something else I read about it that was saying it was mostly the French. There's other rites, of course, many other rites or rituals, depending on how you consider what that word means. But the Scottish rite specifically, there's that involved. The Chamber of Reflection is part of that program.
Yeah, we do that in our Scottish Rite Valley. I've never seen or heard of a lodge using it, I don't know whether you call it portrayal or using a room of reflection. I know when I went to Cuba, it was quite the prominent thing, and every lodge in Cuba uses the room of reflection.
Well, every lodge will prepare their candidate in some way before their first degree. Some lodges may have them come down and they have this big dinner, and maybe there's a lot of just, fraternalism going on, and then off to the degree they go. There may be some lodges that, just start their degree right when they open, and the candidate, might show up early while everyone's setting up and say, did I get here at the right time? I mean, unless you either are managing the time before your EA degree, or you are not managing your time before the EA degree. But either way, a candidate is going to have some kind of an experience prior to the start of your degree. So in our lodge, what we've chosen to do is have that candidate spend some time in solitude. And you can go back through the mystery schools, and there is, in almost every case, a period of time where that new initiate is going to spend some time in solitude. That was part of the process. For us, it's 15 minutes, but in antiquity, you could argue that was quite a bit longer days, if you will.
Yeah, something I hadn't read before in Mackey. He mentions that a man who has undertaken a thing after mature reflection seldom turns back. And I thought, whoa, that's heavy.
Yeah,
there's
actually Aristotle has a quote too. I have a few quotes on solitude. Yeah. Whosoever is delighted in solitude is either a wild beast or a god. That was from Aristotle. Probably a little more contemporary though. The best thinking has been done in solitude. Yeah. That's from Thomas Edison. And Picasso said, without great solitude, no serious work is possible. So I think a special thing happens when a man is in solitude and he has time to reflect upon his own thoughts. And that is a primary goal of the Chamber of Reflection, is a time of solitude.
Mm-hmm. And so do you give the candidates any particular instruction before they go into this room of reflection?
Yes, a little bit. Not a whole lot. What we do is we provide them some parchment and a pen, and we ask them to write down what their Masonic goals are and have them reflect upon that for a little while. I've seen other interpretations of what they want those candidates to write. And so when we sat down as a lodge, we talked about what is it that we want our candidates to focus on. And that was why they're taking this step and what their goals in Freemasonry are. And within that Chamber of Reflection, there are certain visuals that they see, and they're not told what they mean. Intentionally, they're not told what they mean, and it's for them to interpret it in their own way.
So maybe we can pull up that picture now to show them what Zane's referring to.
Yeah, sure. If you want to pull up that one of the illustrations of what a Chamber of Reflection might look like.
Okay, we should have it on the screen now.
Yeah, and we, probably one of the centerpieces is the skull. That is a replica. It's a very good replica. There's an hourglass, there's salt, there's a tarot card of the Fool. Harder to see in the detail there, but there are some symbols for air, water, fire, and earth, and then parchment in there with a pen for some notation. There's also a mirror. There's also something about looking at yourself in a mirror in solitude, where you're just spending time with yourself, and you're thinking your own thoughts that only you hear inside your head, and it's a real interesting moment and experience to go through.
Yeah, it was when we did the fourth degree in the Scottish Rite. When I joined the Scottish Rite, we did the Room of Reflection, and it was we had the instruction of some of the things that we were to think about and consider while we were in that room, and then we were to make our notes, and they were shared later. But I thought that process was quite interesting.
So I think it's important to. So a lot of lodges will ask, "Well, we're interested in doing something like this. Can you, And they'll kind of wing it. And I think that's kind of a dangerous approach, because they want to do it, and they kind of get caught up in the wow factor of it, if you will. And there is certainly something special about a chamber of reflection. However, there's intent behind everything that's on that screen, and it's important for the lodge or the master of ceremonies or the group that's conducting the degree to understand why those are on there. It's not just to create a spooky illusion. It's not, let's go down to the Halloween store and buy all the freaky things that you can put onto a table, and that's our chamber reflection. Everything on there is done with intent and with purpose, and frankly, a lot of it is related to just alchemy and the alchemical importance to the alchemical process, and that's why those things are on that table. The other thing that the chamber reflection represents just before the initiation, and this is why our lodge does it only before the initiation, is that prior to the entrance into a lodge of Masons, we tell the candidate that he stands in darkness. And it's before that first step into a lodge of Masons is where he comes from, and he chooses to step out of the darkness and into the light. So for us, symbolically, that chamber reflection is that state of darkness that he's in.
That's cool. And there's other chamber images that you have right there, Dave, to share with us.
Yeah, and I don't want to break down every single one of them a lot. So some of them are for the. So it's a good question. During the alchemical process, the idea is you take a substance, you break it down into its individual components, and then you reconstruct the new elixir or the newness from those individual components, from those individual pieces. And that's kind of the idea, is that there's salt, there's representations of salt and sulfur, which are two important chemicals in the alchemical process to get broken out of a substance. And so those are represented on the table. There's lots of interpretation behind the skull. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why some people interpret this as being either too scary or too spooky, as you've got this skull, and skulls have no place in Masonry. That's probably a whole other topic in and of itself right there, is do skulls belong in Freemasonry? So from our perspective, yes, they do. They've been part of Freemasonry for a very long time. Perhaps we choose to ignore it or don't talk about mortality, but certainly there's the scythe right there. There's an hourglass to represent the time that we have to labor. So those are some of the things that are on the table. In our lodge, we use also the elements of water, fire, earth, and air. And certainly as you go through the 3 degrees, there's allusion to the importance of each of those in each of our degrees. So some of this is foreshadowing more to come in the 3 steps, the 3 degrees of initiation.
Interesting that you don't have a scythe in your display. Is that, or is it just hidden in this picture?
It's not in this picture. And at the time too, we didn't have our rooster, the cockerel, is not in that picture as well.
Right. So just like the term worshipful, I had an issue with that in the very beginning, and I've told in the past my story about how I overcame that, and it's a commonplace actually in British language. And my friend that went to work in Canada, and she had to call the mayor your worship, and so it easily got over my idea of using the word worshipful. That same idea of the skeleton or the skull and crossbones or those kind of images, like you said, people think that they're supposed to be just scary or whatever. And it is truly an image of mortality, and that we are only here for a time. And what do we do with that time while we're here?
I think that's a central theme to being a laborer. Masonic labor is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Interestingly, for those who are looking for reference back to, is this innovation or not, Preston had a quote too. Wisdom seeks the secret shade, the lonely cell designed for contemplation. That's Preston. You can. What is he alluding to in that sentence? I'll leave that for your own contemplation. There's another element that's in a chamber of reflection, and that's inscribed either on the wall or on a plank or something in there, is the acronym vitriol. And I don't know if you've got that other.
I did share that other photo. We could go back to that. Let's see here.
That was the.
Let me share that one again. Here we go.
Yeah, so you can see that vitriol in the background. Vitriol is actually is an acronym. In Latin, it's Visita Interiora Terra Rectificando Invenis Occultum Lapidem. And roughly what that translates into is visit the interior of the earth. Through rectification, you shall find the hidden stone. Now, the candidate who's sitting in the chamber of reflection is not going to know that at the time. Again, a lot of this is allusion to something that he may learn later on in his Masonic journey. But we've interviewed every one of our candidates that have gone through the chamber of reflection during our agape period after the degree. And every single one of them has said how profound of an experience that was. It completely heightened their sensation of what was about to come. And so that transition from the chamber of reflection into the initiation room is also something that needs to be carefully managed. And if you get the wrong person back there starting to crack jokes and helping them, get ready and all that work that the lodge just did for the 20 minutes that candidate was in the chamber of reflection, kind of vaporizes like that when the concentration and the focus gets disrupted.
I noticed in this photo there's a loaf of bread there, or a section of bread, and it talks in some I've read that bread is symbolic of the raw to the cooked, and then water represents fertility. Is that?
Yeah, and there's, it's like a lot of things in masonry. It's like you keep peeling back the layer upon the layer on the layer. There's usually some kind of exo explanation, and then there's an esoteric explanation for a lot of these things. What's worth talking about in within the lodge is the esoteric reason that these things are on the table. I don't think I had a graphic to flash, but we're alluding to a lot of alchemical steps. There's a whole nother, I'm not a practicing alchemist, and there are lots of there are some Freemasons who are, and can speak more eloquently to the alchemical process. But I'll just say that in general, alchemists have alchemical plates that they use to describe what's happening in the process. And I thought I sent you did I send you another graphic with a disc on it? It was.
Check. I don't think so, but let me double check.
Okay. Might have been the first graphic I sent you. If not, that's okay.
Sorry, it's going to take me a second.
That's okay. The point of it is alchemists have plates to describe their alchemical process, and you think, well, that's interesting. What does that have to do with Freemasonry? And most Freemasons will look at a Masonic tracing board, and it will not make any sense to anybody else who's never been through a Masonic degree. But a Freemason will look at the Masonic tracing board and go, I can tell you exactly what's happening. It's this whole story of the degree all packed into that one picture. And so I guess I would draw the parallel between the alchemical plates that alchemists have and tracing board that Freemasons use to describe the symbolism that's packed within that degree.
Just about there, and share. All right, should have that image up on the screen now.
Yep. So there's another version of the vitriol, circumscribing the circle. There's the lots going in here to unpack. And just like a Masonic tracing board, an alchemist would look at this and be able to describe each of those symbols within the plate there.
Yeah, a lot of symbolism in that one little image.
There's the earth, the terra. There's the sky. There's salt, sulfur. There's probably more packed into here that could be a whole show of an explanation, but a little outside of the scope of the discussion. Point being, though, that you could flash a Masonic tracing board onto the screen, and we would all look at it, and we could spend the next 30 minutes talking about all the symbols that were on there. And somebody who had no idea what a Masonic tracing board was wouldn't have a clue.
Right, and so this alchemist plate, if you will, is related to chamber reflection because of the elements that are part of the chamber of reflection, more
Right.
specifically salt and sulfur and things like that combine into other elements.
Right, you've got, you can see up there's the red circle with the arrow, that's Mars, that alludes to iron. Below that is Saturn, representing the metal lead. Up in the top right corner, that green circle is Venus, and a symbol for Venus, it represents copper. And below that is Jupiter, and that represents tin. There's, like I mentioned, there's the earth, and then the heavens. Those are down there in the bottom half, next to the sulfur and the salt that are just above those. You'll notice there's Mercury right in the middle. There's that circular with the half moon shape on top.
Okay.
So very interesting. And there's hundreds, if not thousands, of alchemical plates that we could, flash and look at and talk about. And 99% of them would be outside the scope of like what I know, but the important point is that there's a parallel between what those plates represent to alchemists and what tracing boards represent to Freemasons.
Yeah,
that's kind of the takeaway.
I was reading too that McCune said that, you know, the purpose of it is not to fill up a vase, but to light a fire. And I think that's such an important direct connection with Masonry. Is it's not to just come and absorb what you hear or what you see and just say, okay, I'm going to fill up my cup. Well, that's important to have a feeling of fulfillment, but it's really to light a fire under you, to go and explore and to learn. And as we always say, Masonry is what you make it. Yeah.
The alchemical process is a little bit like distillation, right? You can kind of think of the example using heated crude oil, right? And they take crude oil and through that distillation process, separate the one type of thing going into multiple things. Fuel for cars and aircraft fuel and fuel for ships and all sorts of different things and layers in between. So that distillation process takes one thing and turns it into another. And I guess if you were to kind of find the similarity from alchemy to Freemasonry, it's we take the raw material, the man, we break him down, and then we take these pieces and we reconstruct him into a better version of himself. And that's a lot of what vitriol kind of stands for, is to look within, and you'll find these pieces, and through this reconstruction will emerge you'll find the hidden stone. That hidden stone is within you.
Very cool.
Yeah, very cool. I had not heard much explanation about the chamber of reflection, with the exception of going into Scottish Rite. And then, of course, you're so busy doing degree work that you're never a part of the chamber of reflection, so you forget all about it again. And so this was quite nice to have you come on and talk about that. Now, is there anything else about the chamber of reflection, that any myths or anything like that you wanted to disband?
Any what?
Myths or misconceptions? Or
misconceptions. It's oftentimes that comes from not really understanding it. And so if you look at it and you don't know anything about it, it looks spooky. It looks like you're trying to maybe scare a candidate. It looks you can't find it in the standard work, and it's like, well, what is this as an innovation? And so that's where a lot of those things just come from, is a lot of misunderstanding. So the fact that you're even doing the show is an opportunity to shed just a little bit of light on the topic. But the misconception, probably the big one, is that there's no connection to Freemasonry, that really, that it has no place within the Masonic institution. And to some extent, I think I would answer that question with, it's not taking place during any Masonic degree. Our candidates spend time in the Chamber of Reflection prior to the beginning of the degree. And I'd ask your lodge, how do your candidates spend time before the degree? Are they hanging out in the dining room, chit-chatting with brothers? Are they not sure what time to clearly come and they're rushing to get to the lodge? Is the lodge kind of cracking jokes? You still hear about lodges cracking jokes about the goat and borderline on hazing. So there's lots of different pathways that a candidate can spend time before they walk in through that door and meet the senior deacon who receives them for his first time into a lodge of Masons. So the question I would ask a lodge is, do you want to conduct that intentionally, or are you going to let it happen haphazardly?
Absolutely. I think just as we as Masons have a ritual that we perform to begin our meetings and to end our meetings, mostly the beginning, one of the ideas of that is that we're packaging ourselves or making ourselves ready to be available for teaching and for understanding and for learning. It's to pause the outside world and to prepare ourselves for what's about to become. And a candidate should have that opportunity as well. Like you said, he may be rushing from work, rushing from home, or where he's coming from. And then if he's thrust into this degree without time to kind of slow down and prepare himself. And of course we have, there's parts of our ritual that do some of that, but to be able to have a time to pause. And even if it's not a full chamber of reflection, as you said, it can go crazy really fast. So be careful how you do it. But even if there's an opportunity for him to pause and just sit by himself and think about what he's about to embark upon is a very important step.
Sure. If nothing else, we've discovered, and I think can agree on, that a time in solitude is an important thing. No one disagrees with that. Interestingly, there's a few more things on, for those that don't really know the alchemical process, I'll just let me offer a few steps, and you would call this the first stage in the alchemical process, and it might go something like this. The very first thing that the alchemist will do is offer a prayer to deity. They then collect the herb by its root in order to obtain the essence of the plant. And they are careful not to let that herb come into contact with metal, which they would interpret to contaminate it. They then dry out the herb and then grind it using a mortar and pestle. They then place the ground herb into a vessel, and they fill it with a spirit, which they call at low water mark. And this is meant to purify the herb. All right. They then place that vessel with the spirit at low water mark into a sand bath. And the reason they do that is it heats the solution evenly, right? So they do that using a crucible, and then they remove it twice per day and they shake it vigorously. At this stage, the herb is then digested and the oil starts to separate out. And then at the completion of that stage, the herb is considered dead. It's the death of the herb, and it's referred to as the caput mortem, or the deadhead. So that's kind of the first stage of the alchemical process, if you will. And I think, if you're a Freemason, you're watching the show, there are certain signposts along those, 8 steps or so that should probably resonate with things that we learn within the EA degree that have been there the whole time, and maybe take on a different perspective when you realize that there's another layer that can be peeled back and considered and examined.
Well, absolutely. And if for some reason you're not a Freemason and you're listening to the show or watching the show and you'd like to learn more about it, of course, contact your local lodge or Grand Lodge. And if for some reason that lodge isn't responsive, don't let that be disheartened. Reach out to the next lodge and the next lodge. There'll be somebody there to assist you and to help you along the way. And again, we want to say thanks so much to Zane McCune for coming out tonight and being part of the show on Chambers of Reflection, and a little alchemy in there as well. And always fun to kind of mix things up, pun intended.
Sure. Happy to be on the show.
Absolutely. Well, again, we'd encourage you to subscribe to the show and to also check out the Masonic Experience on Facebook. It's a private group, so you have to be a Master Mason, I would assume, to be part of that group. Is that right, Jane?
Right. Mason.
A Mason, okay, not a Master Mason, but a Mason. So if you're interested in that and want to learn more, check out the Masonic Experience, as well as our Facebook page on the Working Tools. Again, thanks for joining us this evening. We'll see you on the next show.